Welcome to Redstone class. Today we're covering advanced water placement. We'll go over 5 properties of water and show at least 4 different applications of those properties. There's 2 different types of water source blocks, source and non-source. Right now I'm standing on some source blocks and some non-source blocks. Some of the properties we're going to go over for water are water spread and water's ability to search, source creation, bubble columns, and waterlogging. So let's go over here. So the first thing to know about water is that it spreads 7 blocks. There's 7 different blocks that it will spread across before it will come to a stop. So that means if I were to break this right here, it would come out to this line, because if you count from the source block here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so all of the 7s are lined up right here. Well, what happens if instead of having a barrier here, we have this here? Will it do the same thing? No, because of a property of water where it looks for an ability to go down and goes down if it can. So this is what I call the property of searching. So water doesn't just spread like regular water. You can almost think of water as sentient or alive in Minecraft. So over here, I have an example of what happens when water can reach multiple different places. Water is going to look for the nearest place it can go, and it's going to go in that place. But if I put water here, it's going to identify 3 places that are 3 blocks away, and it's a tie. And so you'll see that it goes to each one of those places at the same time. Now what happens if one of those places goes away? Well, then it will back calculate where it would have gone otherwise and try to spread. And so you can see that you get a whole mess when you do that. Does that make sense? So it's going to want to spread if there's nowhere for it to go. If there's nowhere for it to go, the water is going to spread equally in all directions. But if there's somewhere for it to go, it will go there instead, causing it to spread if it finds out it can't go that way anymore. So there's a limit to how far it can do that. So water will search up to 6 blocks, and then it will not be able to search anymore. So even though this can technically reach to this block, if I were to block this off, it's going to spread everywhere anyway, like this, even though it can reach that block. So even though it can travel 7 blocks, it can only search 6 blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so what's going to happen is it's going to search up to this 6th block. So that's something important to know about water. You'll get some weird behavior with it, and that's essentially the meaning of the word behavior. So let's talk about source blocks and how source blocks are created. So when you place a source block, it's going to try and split in every possible direction, like so. However, source blocks are created when a source block, 2 source blocks are next to it, and there is a block underneath the place where you would put one. So this is important. So you might know that if you have a water source block here and a water source block here, it's going to make this into a water source block. And so this one will become a water source block. If this has one here, I'm going to create it so I can do this as many times as I want. So if it's a water source block, I'll be able to do that. So these are water source blocks that I'm getting rid of. So these 2 are next to this one, and it makes a block. And this makes a block. And the same is true if there's a water source block underneath it. So if I put these 2 water here, this becomes a water source block. And see, these aren't yet. But if I put a water source block here, now this one is. And it functions the same exact way if you have water underneath instead. If you don't, if you have air, now these aren't source blocks. So it's not creating a water source block here. I can't do it here. I can do it down there. No, there's nothing down there either. I can down here, but so I can't do it because there are only 3 water source blocks here. There's nothing underneath. All of those were air, and now they become non-source water blocks that are dripping down. So let's go look over here. This is a good example. So right here, these are not source blocks. And so you can see that the water is bending and pouring down into here from these sources. So if I were to fill this in, the rules would be met, and then the water source blocks would be created. See, now you can see these are water source blocks. But if I were to dig this out, now the rules are no longer satisfied. There are no source blocks down here. And so if I were to empty this out, it's not able to fill back up and make water source blocks again. These are not source blocks. These are water that's spreading out from the source blocks that are sitting on top of these blocks, because the rules are no longer satisfied. There has to be 2 source blocks next to the block where there's going to be. So if I were to put one here, now this one alone is a water source block. There just has to be one underneath. See, now it's gone, and now it can't do it anymore. So that's very important to understand. There's a lot of very interesting implications about that. One of the things is that you can create situations where you have falling water blocks and no source blocks. And so down here, I've got a tunnel made of water that isn't source blocks. And you can even make a room like this one where it is completely submerged in water. And as long as you have the corners covered so that you don't touch the water source blocks together. See, if those were touched together, that would cause, so each of these 3x3 areas around it are not source blocks. I've emptied them out so they're not, but that would convert them into source blocks, and then this would fill with water. So I know it's hard to visualize. So right here, these blocks right here are not source blocks. If I were to dig this out, it's not going to come back in. But if I were to destroy this one, the whole bottom would flood, like so. See, now we're standing in a pool of water, because these were turned into source blocks. And so to prevent that, you would need to make sure that there are no source blocks down here. And so I'm going to do that. It's going to look really messy for a second. But fundamentally, what we just did was clear out all the source blocks. And so now there's no water source blocks here. And now I'm going to have to clear up this water, which can be a pain to do. I'm not going to lie, it's a pain to do. But if we were to clear all of this water out, you see it's not coming back in? See, if I do this, it doesn't come back in. It's not coming back in. And the reason is because those are not water source blocks anymore. That's annoying. So what you want to do, so you don't want to break the top ones first. Even when they're not source blocks, you don't want to break the top ones first, because then there will be water on top of this block and it'll pour over, even though it's not a source block. And so the secret to doing this is you're going to break the bottom ones first when you're filling out the side. I didn't actually have to put those up there. It was just to make sure I didn't have any issues doing it. So you don't want to have the corners broken. If you have the corners here, then you can do anything you want. So that's a little bit about source blocks. If you block off the sides here, let's talk about bubble columns next. So bubble columns, I'm standing on a set of stairs I made out of bubble columns. And by blocking off the sides, I've caused these to not be source blocks, and so the bubbles cannot go any further. This is an important rule to understand with bubble columns, is that they will stop at this point. You might know a little bit about the basics of bubble columns, where you have soul sand that causes you to go up, and magma blocks that cause you to go down. So, whereas this one causes you to go up, this one causes you to go down, and if you sneak, you won't take any damage when you're on magma blocks. So over here, you can see the same exact phenomenon. I'll show it to you again. So only right here, underneath this, is where these come up to. So I won't be pulled down as long as I hover above it, and I will not be pushed up past here. And so I'm standing on the last source blocks inside the water that isn't source blocks. And so that causes me to be able to stand on bubbles. So that's a little bit about bubble columns. They only can pass through source blocks, and that may help clarify the difference between source blocks and non-source blocks. Some of the strange behavior you can do with them. It's not so strange once you understand it, but there's a lot to it. So let's talk about one last thing, and this might help you understand how water can be a redstone block, is if I were to power it, because it detects updates, it can, we'll talk about block update detectors or buds later, but right now, I can make water turned on and off with redstone. Simply by using the fact that it wants to go to this block, but this one's closer. And so as soon as we say, hey, look around, and it says, oh, there's a spot closer, it'll go there. And so if we were to come over here, you remember that we did this trick? Well, this will update it when I break this block, and then it will want to travel. And so water will be updated and look around and recalculate where it wants to go whenever there's a block that changes around it. So the last thing we'll talk about is waterlogging and the rules of waterlogging. So a waterlog block is a fairly new feature, and it seemed really overwhelming when it was first introduced, but it's actually a very simple idea. So waterlogging is the idea that a block that is not a completely solid block can also be a water source block. Once you understand that, the mechanics are very simple. So this chest right here is waterlogged, which means it's a water source block. And a water source block can't spread into these other blocks, even though they could be waterlogged, like this one. They're not waterlogged, and it can't just spread into a block because it wants to. So they will sit here until I move one out of the way, and then it will spread normally like it's a source block. And so the same thing that's true of source blocks elsewhere is true here. The unique thing is that whichever way stairs face, or slabs face, whichever side the water is on, the water will only be able to spread in that direction. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is if we have the top half of a block right here that is waterlogged, is a slab, we will be able to see the water spread on all 5 sides because it's touching that side. But it will only be able to spread down. And if we were to have water on a slab like this on top, so these are bottom half slabs, we could surround it with other blocks like this, and then it will not spread anywhere. And so you have water that's not dripping. And you can do all kinds of fun stuff with it. Whee! There's lots of neat tricks you can do with water because it's only localized to this block. And so any block that it couldn't spread into normally, this is no different than putting half slabs down like this. This is how it thinks of itself. It thinks of itself like this. And so you're seeing that right here just with waterlogging. And so if I were to place a block here, that's exactly what you're looking at over here. So that's waterlogging. Waterlogging is pretty simple. There's not much to cover. So let me show you one other thing with stairs, just to make sure we're completely clear. So if I place water on this, waterlog this stair block, where is it going to go? Well, it's going to be able to go down, it's going to be able to go out, and it's going to be able to go to the sides. But because the entire side right here is blocked off, so think of it as any side that you could place something like a torch on. So let's take a torch and put it right here. Any side that you can place a torch on is not going to have water come through it. And so this will go to the sides like that. And so if we were to block it off like that, then we would only be able to put it in 2 places. So now that it's blocked off, the water's only going to go 2 directions. Out like that. Half slabs are similar. So if we had this facing like this, we'd be able to have it come out of this side and this side too if it were in that. It's pretty straightforward to understand. Simply, the water can come out wherever it touches a side. And so they're very interesting mechanics people do with these, but fundamentally that's all there is to it. So just remember, if you remember one thing about waterlogging, it's that it's just a source block that shares space with something else. So the last, so that's, I would say that's all the rules. I would say that's all you need to know to understand water. Let's go through a couple things you can do with it. I've already shown you that you can do some of these stairs and some of these underwater rooms. Some things you can also do with it include using it for moving items. So if you put items on ice, they'll be slick, and you can move them using water trails. Water allows you to transport items pretty far this way. And in order to make water flow in the right direction, what you can do is when your water runs out, put another source block with a gap, and in here you can put any of these things here and it will cause it to go right through. You could use a slab on top. We could use a half slab. I just wanted to show you that you can also detect them using a pressure plate. We'll talk about pressure plates more in Unit 1. So you can also do signs and trapdoors. It's very common to see people use signs here, but there's other things you can do. And so if you just wanted to have a way to walk over it, you could do that. And so now the items will pass through. So one of the interesting quirks is the location of the items. If you were to change the thickness of this side to be less than a solid block using, say, cake or an ender chest, let's say we used cake, though the items will actually go further. They will be able to go over this pixel right here. And so they will be flowing along this pixel, which means that you can set up an item sorter with a hopper, where if I were to throw this cake in here, it's going to get eaten by the hopper because it comes up against this side and slides along that pixel of the hopper, and the hopper sees it, and now it's in here. And so this is a useful mechanic that people use to do very sophisticated systems. I'm not going to worry about that. We're just sticking to the basics. So other things you can do is you can make a chicken coop. One of the ways it's easy for making chickens, you can breed them and you can use them for feathers, is to go ahead and put a 5x5 like this. Because what happens is these source blocks are just far enough away to where all of the water is pointing to the center block and it can't make more source blocks. And so it'll hold the chickens in the middle and they won't go anywhere. And so that's a neat trick that's commonly done. Another thing is if you need to put a lot of water down, all you have to do is do two sides because there'll be a zipper effect. And so if I were to put water along this edge, you'll see that the water flows downward to this side. Now if I were to put it here, it's going to make a source block right here. And so now these four are source blocks, but because that's a source block and that's a source block, it's going to put one here. And so now all of these are source blocks too. So if I put source blocks right here, oops, now because I put source blocks all the way here and all the way here, this is going to turn this one into a source block and this into a source block, and it's just going to zipper all the way across. And so now there's a source block all the way over here. So if you ever need to do a very large amount of water, that's the easiest way to do it. I think that's it for this one. Hopefully that's not too overwhelming. A lot to cover with water, but there's a lot of fun experiments you can do with it. So let's talk about homework. For homework, I want you to make an underwater room. So make an underwater room like this one. You don't have to do anything crazy like my bubble stairs, but try to clear out a region floating underwater like this. And for an extra challenge, if you think that's easy enough, try to do just that. Do an underwater room. You can do a 2x2x2 or 3x3x3 like this one. And then I want you to expand it. Make it bigger in each direction. So make it bigger in at least one block to the side. Make it bigger at least one block upward. And make it bigger at least one block downward. And so see if you can do that after you do it. And you'll learn a little bit about water and how source blocks are placed. So hopefully that gives you everything you could possibly want to know about water. Lots of stuff. There's always more to learn with it, and I definitely recommend, even if you're intermediate with water, that you experiment with some of these things. I hope you were following along, and if you haven't, try to go through and try and build some of these. So that's it. Do the homework before seeing the next video when we show how to do it, and class is dismissed.